Namaste dear learners, and once again welcome back to the classroom of National Institute of Open Schooling, Senior Secondary Biology course, chapter 24. You remember Principles of Ecology. So we are back to the second part of Principles of Ecology. To give you a very quick reminder, we talked about interconnectedness and interactions in our first part of this video program. And where did we end it? To see the connections. You remember, we ended at the story where the cats had to be parachuted in a particular place. I told you it's a real life story. Now you must be very curious to know, where did it happen? That DDT was sprayed to prevent malaria, and it ultimately led to a series of events in nature which could have brought plague as a danger ailment to that community. This happened in a small island in Indonesia near Borneo. So this was a real life story. Okay learners, so now you are convinced that things in nature are connected. So the lizard on the wall of my house is somewhere connected to me because it is eating some of the insects. And if it doesn't eat those insects, we don't know what those insects could do to us in our homes. After having understood the interconnectedness, which is a little abstract, when you see a gecko on the wall, you don't connect to it. Let's look at two very important processes in ecology which make these connections between nature and us very, very real. Okay. To do that, I'll take you to the next slide. As I said, there are two major processes. There is a constant movement of energy. That's process one. You need energy, I need energy, and therefore we need food. To grow food, we need energy. Like it goes on. So we need energy to do anything on this earth, and therefore there's a constant flow of energy on the earth. That's process number one. But what does this energy bring to us? It brings to us nutrients. It will bring our proteins to us, our carbohydrates to us, our fats to us. They are in turn composed of say carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, sulfur, right? So there are these two essential elements which are constantly moving around in some pattern on the earth. They are the basis of your and my life. They are the basis of life on this earth. So if you and I need to survive in a good manner and let other organisms and species around us also survive well, we need to understand these two processes. Let's begin with energy. Or rather, let's look at those two from a distant view, and then we'll go deeper into it. When it comes to energy, a very common term that you would see in your textbook or also in other literature, it's called energy flow. But when it comes to nutrients, it's called nutrient cycle. Now you see the flow and the cycle, can you see the difference? And can you see the difference in the kind of picture that I've put there? Yes, that's a fundamental difference. All energy on this earth, or for that matter even in the universe, flows in only one direction. So if I start from Delhi and I'm energy and I'm flowing in some direction, I would not come back to Delhi. I would end up in some other point on this earth, but not to Delhi. But if I'm nutrient, if I'm say a carbon or an atom of carbon or phosphorus, wherever I start my journey from, ultimately I will come back there, and therefore it's called cycle. I hope that difference is clear. Now let's see energy. What's the ultimate source of energy for us? We all know that's very obvious. It's sun. Because otherwise there would be no energy on this earth. All the energy that we get ultimately comes from the sun in our case. As in the earth, there are the other planets which may be getting it from some other star as well. Now, what is important for us to know is that whenever the energy is coming to us, you can of course see the sunlight, but when it comes, where does the sunlight come? The sunlight comes to our body. But more importantly, to keep the ecological system, the earth's ecosystem going on, what we need is the sunlight to the green plants. And from the green plants, what we get is food. From the green plants, what we get is food. So when you and I think of energy, or we try to study energy, a large amount of that study is to do with food. The other thing that you and I need to remember, which is a little bit of physics now coming into ecology, is that any process to happen, if we want to walk, if we want to sit down, if the plant moves, if the bacteria moves, all the processes around us need energy. So energy is essential for work. Anytime you see a work happening, if this duster has to move here, it needs energy, and that energy is being given by Shivani at this point in time to the duster. That's the second thing to understand. Now, to know energy better, there are two laws which are universal, fundamental laws of energy. And as the name says, universal, it goes for the whole universe, not just Earth. That energy cannot be created or destroyed. So there is an absolute amount of energy present in the universe which remains the same. It may move from one place to other, it may get transformed from light energy to food energy, that may happen, but we cannot create or destroy energy. That's the thumb law number 1. The second law is that whenever I am using energy to do something, whenever Shivani's body energy is getting moved, is moving this duster, in that process there is always loss of energy. If I am putting X unit of energy here, the energy that is moving the duster and the energy that duster gets in its new position will always be X minus Y. So what does it mean? Now let's try to understand, because this is crucial to understand ecology. So there's sun and this is our Earth. We are receiving energy. Sun may be giving, say, 100 units of energy. By the time it reaches the Earth, it will always be 100 minus something. Let that something be X. Okay? Now, we have a tree here that takes the sun energy and it photosynthesizes. So it gets its food. The energy of this that tree gets will again be 100 minus X minus again something, because there is always the loss. That is what the law is telling me. So we begin with 100 units. In this process, some energy is getting lost, and only a smaller amount of energy is reaching the Earth's surface. On the surface, a lot of things may happen. The sea may get heated, the tree may do photosynthesis, we may get vitamin D out of it, we may also get some energy. But in all these processes, whatever amount of energy is hitting my body, the amount of energy my body will absorb will always be less than what was hitting me. So at every step there is a loss. So there is some loss of energy again happening from here. Now what would happen if there are fruits on the tree which the bird is eating? So we get a bird here. I'm sorry, I'm very bad at drawing. I hope I'm drawing the right kind of bird. And it takes its food from this tree. Now again in this process, there is an amount of energy which is getting lost. Do you see what's happening here? There is a chain that is getting created. And when in this chain, food is getting transformed. Now remember, it came as solar energy to us. Photosynthesis happened here. So food got connected. Inorganic nutrients here used the solar energy to make it food for tree, for bird, for you and me as well. That food is being eaten by some other creature, and this creature may be eaten by another creature. Now you see, the food which is actually moving in what we call as food chain is the movement of energy. So remember, learners, this movement of energy in the form of food from one organism being eaten by another organism is called the food chain. But what does this law of energy, which is still there on the slide, tell you? That the more the number of steps a food chain has, the more wasteful of energy process is happening. Let's look at it. This slide will clarify it to you. What I have done here is also in the slide. Okay? So food chain typically begins with what we call as producers, as written on your slide. Producers are usually the green plants. There are some very small number, let's not discuss about them, but most producers who can use sun's energy to create food as we know it, you and I know it, we need green plants. Okay? Then the plants are eaten by other creatures, which we call as heterotrophs. Autotrophs are plants. Auto means by myself. Creatures who can make their food by themselves are called autotrophs. Then are eaten by heterotrophs. Those are the organisms which cannot make their own food, but they need ready-made food from some other organism or from some other creature. So they are called heterotrophs. In all these steps, there is a constant outflow of energy as well, which is not getting used but is going back and getting dissipated into the universe. So I bring back to you a formal definition of food chain. The sequential chain of eating and being eaten is called food chain in nature, right? Here is an example for you. So you can see it begins typically with the sun, goes to the grass there, and then there is a primary consumer as we call it, and then there are secondary consumers. Where do you and I come? Yes, we are almost at the third level, which is called the tertiary consumer. And I will show you where we stand. My next slide has a little pyramid and I'll tell you where we stand in the pyramid. But why I brought this slide is for you to remember, because in part 1 of our lesson we talked about small creatures like bacteria, fungus, viruses. What do these microbes do? So if you see, a very important part of food chain are the decomposers. These are the small little microbial organisms which eat on the dead bodies when the plant would die, when the secondary consumer would die or the primary consumer would die. All of them, they become food for the decomposers, and in that process they get decomposed, right? So decomposers form a very important and essential part of any food chain. A practical question, can this go on? I mean the food chain. So can the tertiary consumer be eaten by next level of consumer and then the next level of consumer? What do you think? Well, as your slide says, no. And the reason is, remember, so if we have large number of steps here, at every step energy is getting wasted or is not being used. Ultimately, at some point in time, such little energy is left in the food chain that that organism can no more become food for the other one. And that's where the food chain ends. So food chains do end because remember the nature of energy, that it flows, and every time it flows there is some amount which is lost, and therefore food chains have to end. Thus, when we look at a food chain, and now your slide is showing you the pyramid, where do humans stand in the pyramid? The pyramid is typically this shape. This is where we stand in our pyramid. So remember, any insensitive activity that you or I may do with either wasting our food or not being sensitive about the way food is coming to us, remember friends that There are so many steps through which this food is reaching us, and at every step, energy is getting wasted. So when I waste my food sitting at the pyramid, at the apex of this pyramid, I not just waste my food, I waste a series of energy through which this food has reached me. And that's the reason that human beings need to be sensible and responsible in the way we deal with energy and our food, because food is energy as well. We began with energy and nutrients. We just finished food chains and energy. Now look at what happens to the nutrients. So as I said, we just understood food chains and how energy moves with the food in those chain, and at every step there is a little dissipation or little unused energy that goes, in our terminology we call it waste. The other second important process which is there in your chapters and that I also talked about is called nutrient cycling. If there was only sunlight on the earth that came through plants to us, we would not have food on our plates, right? Because you can't have sunlight on your plate. You need something, some material, some substance in which the sunlight is packed, either as sunlight or some other energy, and that is food. But what is food made of? Ultimately, you have already studied, right? We have food which contains so our food is made up of different compounds like protein, carbohydrates. We usually say, na, have low carb diet if you don't want to put on weight, because carbohydrates and fats may give us a little bit more of weight. So ultimately the food is made of these substances. In turn, what are these substances made of? They are made of chemical elements like carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, phosphorus, sulfur. Sometimes we have magnesium in our food, etc. Right? This last element that I talked about, they are the nutrients. And they are found in nature. Like the way we get energy from sun, similarly there is abundant amount of nutrients available on the earth, and through different processes these nutrients come together to make a variety of compounds which ultimately become our food. Now, if we need to get our food ultimately from green plants, they must have access to these nutrients. Exactly. So the tree would take these nutrients from the soil, do some processes inside its body, chemical and biochemical processes, and create food out of it. And ultimately we end up eating a lot of those food, either in terms of the food directly as in the vegetarian food, or we may take it from animals like the fish, the chicken, the meat, etc. When all these organisms die and when we die, our body will get decayed through the microorganisms, and ultimately the protein will break back into carbon, hydrogen, oxygen and nitrogen, or the fat will also break back into this. So these nutrients are released back and they go to wherever they belong. If they belong to the soil, ultimately go back to the soil, but if they belong to the air, they would go to the air. From the soil, they may also even travel to the water bodies. This whole process is called nutrient cycling, because it is cycling. The nutrients come from their pool. There is a nitrogen pool, oxygen pool on this earth, and when nitrogen is released from your body, from my body, it goes back to the pool. So it is called nutrient cycling. Now think, you have carbon in your body, right? Where has this carbon come from? I don't know. It's very interesting to imagine. Could it be dinosaurs? Could it be that there's a little carbon atom on my nose which has come from the tail of the dinosaur? Or could it be that the carbon on my hand could have come from a rose plant? We don't know. But the fact is that the same carbon atom has been constantly getting cycled on this earth for billions of years ever since the earth has been formed. So, we are not very different from dinosaurs. We have all the carbon, hydrogen, oxygen and nitrogen that dinosaurs had, which we may be carrying in ourselves today. Isn't it interesting? Well, for me, that's the attraction that ecology brings. Okay. So, a few facts about nutrients. All the nutrients present on this earth today have been present in the same amount and quantity ever since earth was formed. That's a fact, because you and I cannot create nutrients. We cannot create nutrients. They stay like energy. We get energy and we have what we get. Similarly, we have got nutrients and that's what we have. We can't change the quantum of it. We can, like energy from solar, we can change it to food. Similarly, from carbon, we can change it to carbon dioxide through processes in our body. But we cannot create carbon, we cannot create oxygen. Okay. The other fact. Now, the same nutrient, carbon, oxygen, nitrogen, has been going on and on and on this earth. This set of nutrient that we get on the earth technically is called the global nutrient pool. So, there is a global carbon pool, there is a global hydrogen pool, right? Now, that is also a fact, and the pools have been there ever since earth has been there. The third and a very important fact, and which is then now explained in your textbook, different nutrients follow different paths or different cycle. So, the way nitrogen would move and come to us in our food or will go out of our body after our deaths is very different from the way, say, oxygen would move on this earth, or for that matter, the phosphorus may move on this earth. So, I repeat three things: the amount of nutrients and the kind of nutrients we got on this earth has stayed the same ever since earth was formed. First fact. Second fact, they all have their origin. They come from somewhere and they go back. They are cycled back there. That's called the nutrient pool, the global carbon pool or the global oxygen pool. The third fact that I repeat for you, different nutrients on this earth follow different path. So, if nitrogen is moving from air to the soil, it could be that phosphorus is moving from the soil to the ocean. It could be, but they follow different paths. A cycle which is not there in your textbook, and after that I am going to talk about two cycles which are there in your textbook. This is the nitrogen cycle, and I am not going to talk too much about it, but you remember this is a cycle where the microorganisms play a very important role. The nitrogen is present in the air, you know that, right? And it is present as free. Unlike carbon dioxide, nitrogen is present as nitrogen in the air naturally. This nitrogen has to somehow reach the earth, it has to reach the soil, so that the pulses that we are growing in our farmlands, or the plants which are growing in nature can actually get it, because they need it, and ultimately our system also needs it when we eat our food. Now, from the air to the soil and then into our food chain, I began my first presentation with the insects and the microorganisms. It is these small microorganisms that bring the free nitrogen into the soil and they convert it into a form, I won't get into technical details, which can be absorbed by the plant. So, you see now the connection between the bacteria in the soil and me. If that bacteria was not there in the soil, which was fixing nitrogen for me, I would not get my dal, or I would not get my sambar, or khichdi for that matter, right? A very common cycle, and that's the example that I'm going to take for you, which we have studied, we study in earlier days as well, in earlier years as well, is as we commonly call it as the water cycle. Remember, nitrogen was an element, it was single nitrogen, and we looked at that cycle. Water is a compound, So when we say water is moving, it's actually hydrogen and oxygen which are moving together. And they are a part of the hydrogen and oxygen cycle as well, because those are also cycles that happen on this earth. I'm talking water cycle because it's visible to you, it's also there in the textbook, and perhaps it's there because it's easy to understand. Where does all the water come from? Well, if you ask an adult or a child sitting in the city like Delhi, we would say it comes from the taps. Yes, but there is some source from where it is coming to the taps. And if we want to trace the ultimate source, and if we really rack our brains, I think you all will say rains. Yeah, rainfall brings water for us, the fresh water. But even rains and clouds get it from somewhere. So ultimately, all the source of water on this earth are either the oceans, and as you can see in the slide as well, the large amount of ocean, or it's the ice caps like the Himalayas or the Alps or the Kilimanjaros, from where the water flows into our rivers. These two are the major sources. So from these water bodies, due to the heat of the sun and the heated air, the water gets absorbed, and we know that process is called evaporation. So evaporation happens and the water start getting collected into the atmosphere or the air. We call it the atmospheric water or the water vapor. When too many of it come together, due to a large number of factors, clouds get formed. But every time clouds are formed, rains do not happen. But we know during the monsoon season and right from Holi onwards, there are a number of atmospheric processes which bring the clouds together, at least on our part of the world, which is the Indian subcontinent. And there's this preparatory phase that happens, and then by June, July, the monsoon hits us. So we get the rainfall. So the water which was in the sea, which had salt in it, remember, it gets evaporated and comes to us as fresh water. When the rainfall happens, there are three kinds of major processes that can happen in water cycle. The first process is that the rainfall gets down into the ground and it gets stored as groundwater or underground water as we call it. That's first process. The second process is that you and we use it from the surface water bodies. And the last process is that sometimes it also flows back, sometimes ultimately it flows back to the ocean. So you see, water is reaching back where it started from. This constant flow of water from saline or non-saline sources into the form of rain and coming back to the land, this is called the hydrological cycle. Now, two more things which are there in your chapter are two technical terms, and then you must understand. With this, principles of ecology will close for this particular purpose. Ecological niche and habitat. Habitat is now a common English term, and we know habitat. What is habitat? Jahan hum rehte hain, the place where we live. So what's your habitat? Your habitat may be flat number N403, Srinand Nagar, maybe Garhwal, I don't know, or for that matter Guwahati, wherever you may be living. That's your habitat. But remember that habitat also belongs to your father, it also belongs to your mother or your brother, sister, or your spouses if you are married. So learners, where you live, many more people live. So their habitat is also the same place, isn't it? But if I have to find you, how do I find you? What's your unique ID? That will help me to find you. And that's the second term in ecology, which is called niche. The niche is not just my habitat, but within that habitat, what function do I play? What role do I have? So am I the son? Am I the younger son? Am I the elder daughter? Now the minute that function gets attached to me, it becomes my niche. So my niche is the place where I live, that's my habitat, but within that place, my role or my function. So n number of insects and trees, their habitat may be, insects and birds, their habitat can be one common neem tree. But within that habitat, different insects are eating different things and they are playing different roles. The birds are also eating different parts of the tree and playing different roles. Therefore, their niches are different. So remember, there is a difference between habitat and niche. Don't get confused about it. If you start getting confused, think about how is your role within your family different from your sister's role, and you will find your niche. So I've explained ecological habitat and ecological niche in the most simple terms that I could have explained to you. With this, we close the chapter on principles of ecology. I enjoyed doing it for you, and I hope you are enjoyed being with us at the classroom of National Institute of Open Schooling. Thank you, learners.